Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to In Our Own Voices National Black Reproductive Justice Agenda 2024. I am a reproductive justice voter kickoff. Listen, this is the first of a series of virtual panel discussions that we're going to be having all year about why reproductive justice should be on the ballot box. But tonight, we're going to be having a great discussion with reproductive justice leaders from around the country. And we're going to be talking about number one, reproductive justice. If you don't know what it is, it's the right to have a child, the right to not have a child, the right to raise that child in a safe and sustainable environment, and the right to sexual expression and sexual pleasure. So, tonight's discussion, we're going to be talking all about that. And number one, I want to encourage you if you have any questions, if you want to join this conversation, please drop that in the chat. You can share your thoughts, you can share your questions because we're going to be listening all night. Now, I already talked about what reproductive justice is. Let me tell you a little bit about In Our Own Voice. And we are the first and only national organization that is focused on reproductive justice for Black women, girls, and gender expansive people. We're the only organization that focuses on federal and state policy shifts because we are a federal, state, national partnership. So we focus on getting laws passed and we focus on speaking up for Black women, girls, and gender expansive people. And why is that important? Why are we talking about voting and reproductive justice today? Number one, is because your vote is powerful and we must commit to voting for reproductive justice at the ballot box in 2024 because we know, as Audre Lorde says, that Black women do not live single issue lives and that these elections are more about the issues and not about the candidates. So let's get into it. I'm going to ask some of my partners, the people that I'm going to be talking to today in tonight's discussion to introduce themselves. Krystal, would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your organization?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm KR or Dr. KR, whatever comes out, I'm good with. Pronouns they, she. Yes, and I'm the executive director of Spark Reproductive Justice now. We're here in Atlanta, Georgia. We're about 17 years old. And a lot of our work is centered on, like, all of our work is centered on centering Black, queer, and trans liberation through the reproductive justice movement and lens. And the bulk of what we focus on is leadership development, really allowing Spark to be an entry point to political education and a political pipeline and leadership pipeline, legislative advocacy, grassroots organizing, and civic engagement and mobilizing, base movement and mobilization. So I could speak a lot more to some of those pieces, what have you, but I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Also joining us is Janette Robinson Flint. Great to see you, Jan.
It's good to be here. I am really enjoying Women's History Month this year in 2024 and celebrating Black women. Our organization, Black Women for Wellness, celebrates Black women all year round. But this particular year, we are very excited to be launching a number of campaigns centered with voting because we know the importance of voting. We know the importance of policy as well as the importance of program. BWW has been around now for 25 years, and we've had a lot of good success. We started out doing programming, having Sister Friends for Expected Moms. We moved down the road to look at system change, and that's when we started looking at the elected officials and administrators who control systems. And then from there, we realized that we had to build our power. And that's where we started our civic engagement program. So we do a little bit of it all. And sometimes we do it at the kitchen table with Kitchen Divas. Sometimes we do it with our youth. It Get Smart Before You Get Sexy in our Rites of Passage program. But many times we are in partnership with allies like those of us in Our Own Voice and allies in our state legislature and in our county offices. So I'm happy to be here to share some of the good news coming from our org and from the work that Black women are doing.
Great. I'm looking forward learning more. And last but not least is Kaylan Tanner. She's a member of the In Our Own Voice staff. Kaylan, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kaylan Tanner. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a member of In Our Own Voice. Here at In Our Own Voice, I'm the manager of state policy. So I am tracking legislation across all of our different states. We have 8 strategic partners, and we have 4 state enhancement initiative partners, all located in 10 different states. And so with that, my job is to amplify the amazing work our partner organizations are doing on the ground, while also providing technical assistance like some resources or guides, or even building relationships amongst our partners and also their state legislators.
Thanks. And so I really want to get right into this conversation because we have a lot of important topics to cover tonight. So let's talk about the role of reproductive justice in voting. I talked about what reproductive justice is, but now I want to focus on why we utilize the reproductive justice framework as we go out to turn out votes and as we engage in our policy and advocacy work. So let me start with KR. How does reproductive justice empower individuals and communities at the ballot box?
Yeah, so in thinking about just reproductive justice as a whole, some of the core tenets are self-determination and bodily autonomy. And I think when we center the conversations around reproductive justice and highlight those tenets of self-determination and bodily autonomy, we can draw in all of our folks, right? Because as you said, we don't live single issued lives. And also being real that like all folks, all BIPOC folks, all Black folks don't have the same entry point when it comes to like our political alignment and lineage, right? So like we're all different. Just because we may look the same and share different things culturally and such, we all are, on different lines politically at times. But if you enter into the conversation around systemic oppression, bodily autonomy is the things that we all collectively have to navigate on a day-to-day basis, be it within the educational system, around disability justice, around gender justice, racial justice, Black liberation, queer liberation, trans liberation, all of these different multitude of things, then we can begin to move together collectively. And I like that you named like to empower us, because I think that when you think about reproductive justice, the question isn't around empowerment, because we know we have power. And I think that our political system thinks that they're the ones that are supposed to empower us and through policies and through legislation or whatnot. But I think something that we have to do and are working towards collectively as a movement is assuring that our communities understand like we are power, like people power, right? Collective power building and power shifting is a part of reproductive justice, is how we take care of us individually and collectively as a community, and how we move through this movement in order to essentially be free. Like, what are we fighting for? Like, we're fighting for freedom. We're fighting to be free. We're fighting for liberation. So, we're fighting to envision a world that we don't have to go to the polls, because like we've created systems and things that like are truly for us and perpetuate like joy and love and care, right? And we have all the things and resources we need. So I think that as we use this reproductive justice framework, how can you speak about freedom without using reproductive justice, right? Like if we don't have a collective like agenda of what we're trying to achieve, we're going to get lost in those single issues that we don't 100% align with, right? But if we understand that like Black liberation is at the core, queer and trans liberation is at the core to this fight, this collective fight towards freedom, then we will truly understand reproductive justice. And I think we've all have said it, but I'll say it again, like you can't get to Black and queer and trans liberation without getting to reproductive justice, and you can't get to freedom and justice for all, or not even all. That sounds too like United States of America for me, but like you can't get to freedom and liberation and just like equity and all of these beautiful things and joy without really rooting our conversation in the work in reproductive justice when we're talking about liberation.
I'm so glad you brought that up. And I'm also glad you brought up the point about the Black community and how we're committed to, we're one of the most committed voting bloc. Black women are the largest voting bloc in the American electorate, and we play in a decisive role in that. We're going to do it in this year's election, and we do it in every election. And it's really important that we understand that, because a lot of times our votes are taken for granted. And when we understand the power that we have, then we can definitely exercise that. Jan, tell me how you feel about this. Why do you think being a reproductive justice voter is going to be critical to empowering individuals and communities at the ballot box?
So I think about it from the justice word in that perspective, in that we are all seeking justice. And that is the language, and the human rights language is what we use when we start talking about reproductive justice in the Black community. So I live and work in California and have a couple of great examples in terms of how what we do as voters impacts the systems and what our outcomes are in terms of interaction with those systems. When Black Women for Wellness went to a couple of legislators to say we have some systemic problems with women seeking perinatal health care, they kind of laughed at us. We went out and talked to 10,000 of their constituents and came back and told them that, and the joke was over. And they started realizing that they would need to pay attention to our agenda, and our agenda centered Black women, and it centered reproductive justice. For us, when we talk about reproductive justice, we're talking about those intersecting issues. We're talking about maternal and infant health. We're talking about comprehensive sex ed. We're talking about water and plastics. We're talking about all those things because, as we have all said, we don't live single issue lives, right? And the water we drink contributes to our health and well-being. And the people that we vote into office really have the guidance from us about how we are treating those systems. If we're asking for clean water, if we're asking them to stop drilling oil wells in our backyard, if we're asking them for basic human rights, or even to check their implicit bias, i.e. their racism and sexism, when we have Black women and girls presenting for reproductive health care. So that's why it's important to be a reproductive justice voter, because we are looking at all of those issues that intersect in our lives, and we're holding accountable the people we have elected to represent us, and the people who have been appointed, those administrators who are charged with systems. So that's why, because it impacts. We have a saying, voting rules everything around me. And that's our civic engagement program. And that's what the folks who are doing door knocking and who are making those phone calls are saying. Voting rules everything around you. So let's look how we use our vote. And the other thing I'd like to say is that the one thing we know about Black women, in addition to us being that bloating block, we are the moral compass of this country. How Black women vote is the human rights and dignity and respect. That's who we vote for, and that's what we vote for. So if people are thinking about how should we vote, they should follow. They should trust Black women and how we are making those decisions around voting.
And we're always voting. We're thinking about these other reproductive health concerns. And I'd love to hear you all talk more about why, for us, voting in this election is going to be so much more than abortion. But before we do that, I'd like to hear from Kaylan, who's going to be talking to us about these issues from a young voter perspective. So, Kaylan, why do you think this is important?
So RJ is connected to every aspect of my life, every aspect of a young person's life. I'm glad that you said it's not just an abortion issue. That is the hot topic right now, but it is multi-layered. It is environmental justice, it's economic justice, it's being able to afford, to live, right? To have a healthy life, to thrive. And so as a young voter, reproductive justice allows me and allows others to align their values with different issue areas that directly and indirectly affect their lives and also their communities. So if you don't necessarily agree with a specific candidate, you don't necessarily agree with a specific candidate or a person, you may align more with the different ballot measures and making sure that, hey, it's not just this person on the ballot. There is access to clean water on the ballot. There is taxes, economic justice on the ballot. So making sure that we think about this from different layers and relate it to each aspect of our lives is really important to me and to young voters in general.
You know what? That's such a good point, because, we just released a poll this Monday. It's called The Lives and Voices of Black Families in 2024. It's the third of this type of poll that we've released. I want to note that In Our Own Voice is leading the trail in this place. Our polls are not only the first and only of its kind, it's the only poll that is exclusively Black adults. So when we say this is how Black men, women, and gender expansive people feel, these are their values, these are their opinions, we mean that. And so one of the things that came out of our extensive report was a lot of data that was saying that this election cycle in particular, and what's on the minds of Black people, is that cost of living and racial justice and racism and healthcare are not are our top issues, not abortion. And I think that's really important to note that, because a lot of people think, and which we have been able to demonstrate all the way back to 2012 when we did our first poll, that consistently, abortion is not the top issue. It's important to us, to be sure, but there are other reproductive health concerns for us. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. Tell me why, KR and Jan, why do you think these issues, which are very much related to reproductive justice, are more prominent issues and more important than abortion? Help people understand that.
Yeah, I think that, well, as folks know, like, the conversation around abortion doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It's not just, this is a decision I'm trying to make and trying to figure out how to get access to a service or what have you, right? It's not that simple. It's super layered. And even before we can even have conversations about abortion care, full range, comprehensive sexual and reproductive care, et cetera, which encompasses abortion, we have to speak about, like, are we able to just live? Like, can we walk outside our home and not have a threat of being unalive just because of our identities? Can we safely engage in sex work? For folks who engage in sex work, do we have access to, as Jan was saying, like, clean water, clean air? If I have asthma, I can't even leave my house, or I can't even, go to a certain area or use public transportation or anything like that. How am I going to even talk about accessing healthcare, right? Cost of living, as you mentioned, cost of living is shit. Like, like, we're like having a fair, not even just fair. I feel like fair is bare. Like, I was not trying to rhyme. But I feel like fair wage is like the extreme bare minimum. Like, why aren't we and our legislative decision makers making decisions to make sure that people can just pay their bills and go beyond just like living paycheck to paycheck, but also being able to, like, grocery shop, because we all know that has went up too as well, and not just grocery shop at the corner store or at the Dollar Tree, and where we can try to get groceries where we can or whatnot, but like actually go to what is it, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Aldi, all the places that actually have, like, a better selection of produce and things of that nature, right? So, like, including, I mean, if we are struggling to cover the cost of our rent, if we're struggling to pay for a bus pass or whatever it may be, like, how are we even going to have a conversation about some of these other things that aren't, like, necessarily our day-to-day worries, right? And then how are we even going to get people to the polls? Like, if our goal is to, like, move people and people power and build collective power around shifting our political environment and creating better policies that feel a little bit more better for us, that we can navigate a little bit more towards this collective act, towards freedom, how do we have those conversations when we're leading with a healthcare, service and things of that nature, right? But we're not having conversations around people's ability to like just live. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it's so important to enter into the conversation, and it's important that it's been highlighted in these polls too as well, because it paints a picture. We're so concerned about, are we able to like live and also get more towards thriving, that we can't even begin to have in-depth layered conversations around, as you said, like abortion and other issue-based services that we need and such, because our basic needs aren't being met that are the most important to our communities.
Thank you. And, so another top issue that came out of that poll was racism and racial justice. Jan, tell me why that relates directly to reproductive justice.
That's so that because it does, because I think I saw this joke last night that says that Black people are Black all day long, but we turn up our Black sometimes, and sometimes we turn down our Black, right? And we are impacted by racism on a regular and consistent basis. Sometimes it's microaggression, like, ooh, can I touch your hair? And sometimes it's very macro, just in terms of the aggression. It is, do we get the job or not because of who we know? It's, do we get the funding or not if we're in that funder whisperer community, or, because we haven't been having those access. It is that our men folk are more likely to be killed with a police encounter than anybody else's men folk. So it is something that impacts our daily lives, our education, our employment, our, as KR said, are we attacked for how we look or how we present in the real world? And that's how we categorize that whole racism, and particularly for me, the anti-Black racism that goes along. And if I am your average voter and you're not talking to me about my daily issues, about the food that comes into my community that is of a different quality than your community, or if you're not talking about the price of gas, or that I'm paying 3/4 of my monthly income for rent or the mortgage, and that I'm making less money. As a Black woman, we make less money even doing more work. So if we're not talking about those issues and weaving them into a reproductive justice conversation, then we're really not having a reproductive justice conversation. We might be having a reproductive health or rights conversation. So that's why it came up. I want to go back to one of the first polls that In Our Own Voice did, came back and said that water was a concerning issue. This was before water became a popular issue, right?
Mhm.
So, and getting the voices and the concerns of those who are closest to the issue and the problem really dictate the solution. And if the poll says that we are concerned about inflation, about the economy, better believe that there are other folks who are concerned about that also, but that is the real issue we need to address. Reproductive justice is so much more than abortion. And I am so happy that folks are now coming on board to realize that abortion was it was barely a floor of what is needed for true reproductive health equity in this country. We needed to talk about access to reproductive health services, to birth control, to perinatal care. We know that Black women have the highest mortality and morbidity rates behind birth or trying to give birth. So we needed to bring in all of that, the environment, clean air, clean water. We wanted to plant a garden, but we couldn't do it because the soil was contaminated, in near our homes. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have to look at all that stuff because it all absolutely contributes to when we want to have a child and if we want to have a child, and our health status to go through a pregnancy and give birth. All of that contributes to that. And all of that is at the kitchen table conversation. So
Yeah.
thank you for asking In Our Own Voice, because we needed to hear the voices of Black folks.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a great segue into this next conversation we're having around how, Krystal, you talked about this already, about how we're getting people to vote. I mean, if you already don't know, to some of our viewers, In Our Own Voice really does have our finger on the pulse in terms of what Black voters are demanding and expecting from political leaders. And so our RJ Voter Initiative is all about getting out that vote. We are across the country. We are equipping voters with information to help them utilize that RJ lens, which is a broader lens, which really just focuses on the issues and says, don't take our vote for granted. We know that we carry a lot of these elections on our back, but now we're going to make sure we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to make sure you do what you say. And so I want to talk a little bit more to KR, Jan, and Kaylan about how individuals, some of these viewers on this call, but also organizations, can mobilize effectively to support reproductive justice in upcoming elections. Why don't we start with Kaylan?
Okay, I'm going to give the youth perspective because I'm still, I think, a young person. But I will say folks always have this thing of like organizations, individuals are like, how can we get the youth to vote? How can we get young folks to vote? It's simple, right? Talk about the issues that matter most to us, right? And I think when we talk about mobilizing the youth to vote, it starts not only with other organizations, but ourselves. And so one way I look at it is, what does community mean to you? What does it look like to you? As a young RJ voter, we have the unique ability to define our own communities. Are you based on a college campus? Did you start a new job? Are you on a sports team? Are you in a book club, a movie club, whatever that looks like? You can start having these conversations today in your communities, in your version of your community. Because ultimately, you know your community. You know their thoughts, you know what they care about. And so now you connect those issues to reproductive justice and use that lens and make a plan. And so I know a lot of folks talk about make a plan and vote. What does that look like, right? That doesn't mean that you make the plan just for yourself. You make the plans for your community now, right? And you don't just take people to go vote or tell them different things. You educate them on the ballot measures. I don't know what's worse, someone not voting or someone being an uneducated voter. So for me and my family, we make sure that we're in the group chat texting each other, talking about, did you hear about this ballot initiative? Or what about this? You think a yes or a no? What do y'all think? And then we have those conversations, and then we go to the polls or we do the mail-in ballots. But those are just some things that I think about when I think about young voters, how to get us engaged, and really tapping into our own communities.
Thank you, Kaylan. I mean, I want to send a special message to the young voters. Those that may be considering sitting on their hands saying that my vote doesn't matter, just ask yourself this question. If your vote didn't matter, why would they be working so hard to take it away from you? KR, tell me some things about what you're doing to support reproductive justice in upcoming elections.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to respond to Kaylan. I'm so happy you didn't say get like someone that is like, I don't know, pop culturally relevant to like show up at the White House or whatever and just, say catchphrases like, at the end of the day gotta end. I love Glorilla. I love it, and also as you said, folks have to be informed as voters, right? It can't just be someone that's like super culturally relevant and then that moves my vote, right? And I don't by far claim to be like, as part of the younger youth category. I think I'm at the tip of it or whatnot, but I know as a engaged person in the legislative process, and also as an abolitionist, it's challenging, right? Because I'm an abolitionist, but I also want to be a part of this process because how do we actively navigate the systems as best as we can and try to create systems that work better for us while also envisioning a better way of things of communal care and things that will serve us better, right? So I think that as the upcoming generations come into movement spaces, I think the tone or the culture shift is more about how we can envision and redesign and create, right? So I think it's important, as you said, to be informed. And So that's one thing, and my headset keeps falling out. So sorry, y'all. But the other thing is, another thing you named is identifying your community. So I think that's something Spark does really well in that, we understand that, like, although we center in like our work on like Black women, Black queer folks, Black trans folk, and Black gender expansive folks, that like all of our communities do not have the same layer of what is the most important to them in this, in on the political agenda, right? So I think knowing your community within those communities and having like conversations, collective conversations centered around political education, not just what's on the ballot, but like, what does this mean for us? Like, these are the things, I uplifted, sex work earlier, right? So there's a community of folks that engage in sex work. Like, what does this mean for us in our protection and our safety and, access to care and livelihood and being, decriminalized and things of that nature, right? Like, how can we have conversations in community around political education and how our lives directly are impacted by decisions that are made or not made, right? So I think that's very important. And then the last thing that I'll say is, for my organization specifically, a lot of that grassroots organizing and mobilization, because those two different things, you can organize folks, but how are you getting them to move is a whole different thing, right? So like, you organize by like that community piece, right? Bringing folks together, identifying like, how we built that collective power. And then the mobilization is like, what do we do with that power? How do we shift that power? How do we collectively move? And a part of that work, which I don't think is said enough, is culture shift work. Like, you can absolutely have some political education and speak about how these issues affect me individually and collectively as a community. And also, like, if culturally our thoughts and ideas and practices aren't shifting in the ways in which we envision policy and redesigning and shifting systems, then why are we doing these other things? Like, yes, like, we're not all going to be abolitionists. We're not going to all have the same political alignment and things of that nature. But like, can we at least agree that we want to be free? Like, can we agree on that? And how we get there might look different, But if we can say collectively, yes, I want to be free, then it might take some steps in between that. But that's a culture shift. I don't think we're actively saying we are going to the polls because, not that the government's going to get us free, but we have a vision to getting free. And this is just a step in that process. So that way we can at least, like, not be unalived, and create policies that are going to function a little bit for us while we do that deeper work in culture shift and change.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, right? This is not just going to happen. We're not going to get to that longer vision of liberation in just if we only vote in the national elections, right? We got to vote every election all the way down the ballot. Jan, how can individuals or organizations mobilize effectively? You're doing a lot of that work in California to support reproductive justice in upcoming elections.
Sure. I think one of the things that I really want to emphasize here is that we can't just show up right before the election. Our work is ongoing year round. You can find Black Women for Wellness 365 or 366 days this year, right? And that means that our field team, our community health outreach workers, and our programs, our food distribution program, are all working year round. So when we start talking about voting, it's not just before an election. We're talking about voting all the way around and how voting impacts this food distribution program. Our voting impacts the the culture at this particular hospital. So it has to be year round. We can't just parachute in for an election and think that, okay, that's going to work. People are going to listen to us. So having deep roots in the community and listening just as much as we talk, right? We have to listen to what the community is saying to us, which is why I said I'm so glad that In Our Own Voice did a poll to say this is what the community is saying, to document that. It's important for us to say, this is what you are saying to us, and this is what action we're taking based on that. Some of the programs that we're also having in terms of listening to our community, we're launching a Fierce Auntie campaign. So just like For me, there were aunties in my life, right? There was my Aunt B, who was the person who had run interference with my mom, right? When I had to give her some bad news, she was the person I told first so she can calm my mom down so she'll be able to receive it. But there are aunties in everybody's lives. A lot of rich aunties get a lot of PR right now, right? And you have to find that rich auntie because she's off traveling somewhere. But she's generally that person that you ask for the dollars if you need birth control or if you need an abortion, that type of thing. So we want to engage the aunties, those folks who mother our community, who may or may not want to have children, who may or may not have children, but whose presence are essential in our health and well-being and our ability to negotiate this quagmire called life. So we're enlisting the fierce aunties. We're doing glam days with them. We're doing salons with them because, as Kaylan said, it is absolutely imperative that we have an informed voter. We can't just have people going to vote based on commercials, based on TV ads, or based on the mailers they got, because they will say anything because their thing is to get you to vote for them. But we really need to vote for us. We need to vote for our community and our community interests. We also know at Black Women for Wellness right now that there is a coordinated attack on young Black men, right? That they have some cultural influencers who are saying they should not vote in the interest of Black communities. So we have enlisted some young Black men, they're called Empower 25, to really make sure that young Black men have a reproductive justice lens with their voting, that they are not just thinking about influencers or popular cultural people. I won't even call them icons. They just have the media. They have the microphone right now. But folks inside those communities, folks inside Nation of Islam, folks inside the Cypher or rap community, folks inside those conversations who can say, this is how we can be a reproductive justice voter. This is how we can vote for the community and not vote for political figures, vote for issues, those types of things. So our Fierce Auntie and our Empower 25. And then, of course, we have a FAB Council, which is the future of abortion. So BWW has our hands in lots of pies, trying to make sure that folks are informed, but make sure that as each issue pops up, the Supreme Court issue popping up, that folks have a trusted source of information to go to for the truth, the details, and the data around this. So they're not making decisions that are being driven by people who are not interested in the health and well-being of Black communities.
Thanks. I mean, that's great. That's amazing work that you're doing. Not even just with advocacy, but the outreach, the training that you're doing. And it really does uplift the importance of that state level work in promoting reproductive justice. I want to just check in with our viewers. I encourage you again, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. And maybe after hearing this conversation, you've been thinking, well, what can I do? Well, one of the things you definitely can do is check your registration status. We've made that really easy for you. You can go to our website, which is iamanrjvoter.org, and navigate to resources, and right there it says check your registration status. If you're not registered to vote, we make that easy for you to do. All you have to do is go there, click on that same link. It's going to direct you you type in your zip code. It's going to direct you to your state registration portal, and you'll be able to register. So again, visit iamanrjvoter.org and check out that research. Maybe you're a little bit further along in your advocacy, and you get some great ideas. I encourage you just to reflect, say, what did I do last time we had a major election or election that I cared about? What did I do to organize? What were the lessons learned? What are some ideas that I'm taking away from this? And then if you have other questions, reach out to us, because we want to be helpful to you. This is work that we're doing 24/7. KR, we heard some great examples of how Black Women for Wellness is engaging in state level advocacy. Is there anything else you want to talk about and what you're doing in Georgia?
Yeah, I will say that for us, a lot of the work is really like culture shift work and building collective community power in order to get folks engaged in the conversation around political education and learning more about the legislature and such, so we can get people to show up at the Capitol and during like a hearing and such, right? So it's that community building work and leadership development work, because yes, it's important to see folks like us in these positions, these political positions and such. We're also aware that like the folks in community don't always feel safe with these positions and don't feel safe with going to the Capitol. So like, how can we support people in their power of showing up how they can based on like what feels right and safe for them, be it like an email, a letter drop or blast or whatnot, a banner drop, like, and how can we use folks who are in this movement and willing to like kind of be more on the front lines because of their privileged identities and things of that nature, right? So like, we try to just make sure that we're still, even in the legislature, constantly taking care of each other and making sure like we're not, trying to get people to the polls, and that essentially can, not be the best for them, right? So like seeing where people, I'm sorry, let me actually rephrase that. Yes, getting them to the polls, but not getting them to the state capitol. Sorry,
Yeah.
and such, because speaking to like legislators and things of that nature takes a lot, and also like based on like identities and such, it could be not a place that feels safe to folks, right? So what we're doing locally in Georgia is really like that communal care and power building and shifting, and also, I mean, we're in Georgia, we're in the South, and the legislature, we just ended legislative session. We're actually taking a week of rest. It is just layered, and there's just some, wild things that come up in the legislature that's like, how did we get here, and such. Well, we know how we got there, but like, also what, so like we see a lot of like anti-trans bills, bills that influence, what schools are naming and teaching and things of that nature, and like bathroom bills and, sports bills for kids, and just a lot of different bills, right? And in addition to like repro and religious freedom bills and things of those, like just stack layers. And what we do know, we've set this like off, this live today, is that like the other side has a long-term strategy for the ways in which they see these things being intersectional, right? Like they truly understand intersectionality, and like for the long game, the long haul. So they like, we're kind of questioning like, how did this come about? But they know they're stacking them, right? And it's one tack after another. So a lot of our work is not to be on opposition or not to be on defense constantly, but to think kind of like opposing, like what is our long-term strategy to as well? Like how can we build and shift and move power? So that's a lot of what we're doing in the state of Georgia. We actually have, and I know we're coming up on time, but we have a really strong, a cross-movement partnership in Georgia. We have several different reproductive justice groups that collectively work together as a part of like a state table, in addition to our Repro Health, Right, and Justice coalition that is now, most of that work is folded under Amplify, which does a lot of like our policy and political advocacy work and such, that allows a space for our movements to like come together, or organizations to come together to do some collective legislative advocacy and such, and grassroots organizing. So yeah, that's kind of like the reproductive justice ecosystem right now in the state of Georgia. We are, again, just wrapping up legislative session. So I think right now, not that the work is done, but now our focus is not just on the state. Now it's more on the federal legislation session, so we can begin to get people to the polls come November and before.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for so much. I mean, you really just illustrated why it's so important for us to engage in every election, because local elections matter. I mean, if you care about what's being taught in schools, the books that are being read, what's happening with your streets, what kind of resources are going to be allocated to your community, all of that happens at the state and local level. So school boards, libraries, city council, all of that. So, I wish we could get more into that, particularly around things like ballot measures. But I want to get back to Kaylan, and I want to get back to this young voter conversation, right? Because there's a lot of myths going on about how young voters are not going to turn out to vote. Now, I'm not saying that's completely untrue, because our most recent polling that we released, I said earlier this week, noted that about 1 in 4 Black voters between 18 and 29 years old say that they have thought about not voting in 2024. But about 75% of young Black voters feel that the Black community has the power to change elections. So what that says to me is that we're going to turn out to vote. But right now we need to have some important conversations about what's happening. So Kaylan, let me start with you. What do we need to do to engage young voters in this election cycle? What do you think that young voters care about most right now?
Okay. Well, one, I want to start off with this idea of young voters are not going to turn out to vote. We unfortunately are not motivated in the best of ways because of what's happening, with a lot of issues right now. So like in the RJ movement, we understand there is voter apathy amongst young people. We understand that. But I don't think anyone has really done a great job, or any organization, or just anyone in general movement has done a great job addressing that and the approaches that we should take. And one of the approaches, I think, is empathy. Why do young people feel this way? We need to be clear that there are so many valid reasons why one may not feel as motivated to vote when they've been voting time after time after time, right? But instead of putting the blame on a lot of young people, I think we need to start holding elected officials accountable across the board, local, state, and federal. We need to highlight these issues that are pressing to young people, and then press upon our elected officials for misrepresenting their communities, not listening to young folks and others' voices, right? And Regina, just getting back to the poll, like you said, according to our most recent poll, young Black voters, they prioritize economic issues such as access to affordable housing, healthcare, fair wages, and student debt relief, which are seen as essential to us for our safety, for our security, for us to actually thrive, right? So this encompasses a lot of concerns about the cost of like groceries and gas, just daily things that we deal with. And additionally, like the economic opportunity, including the expansion of small businesses, was a significant consideration in the poll for young Black male voters. So with all of these economic factors that are deeply, connected within the reproductive justice movement, we also see like the highlighted impacts of the case like Dobbs on young Black women's lives. For many, Dobbs raised a lot of fears about wanting to have a child, planning on when to have a child, if they want to have a child, mortality if one was to become pregnant, prompting considerations about moving out of state, crossing state lines, even refraining from having children, or just the risk of being arrested related to a pregnancy. So all of this is what our poll has stated that young people are concerned about, and that they are considering when going to the polls this year.
I think so. So basically, plain and simple, that's what young voters care about, right? So if there are any elected officials on this live, this is how you need to be talking to young voters. But those of you are going to be talking to your family and your friends, encouraging them to turn out to vote, this is how you're going to talk to them, to say, I see you, I hear you, I know these are concerns, they're valid concerns, but we still got to turn out to vote, because if you don't vote, then we're going to have candidates that are even less likely to push on those issues that we care about. I know we're coming up on time, but I wanted to ask Jan or KR if one of them would take this question. You've heard the concerns. How do we engage with young voters in this election cycle when they're raising these concerns like that? Just one of you take this one, please.
So I'm going to say that the one thing I say to young voters is not voting is voting too. Right? If you don't show up at the voting booth and mail in your ballot, that's still a vote. So the question is, are you going to be an active voter, or are you going to be a passive voter and vote for something that is not in the interest of yourself or our community? So I say that. And then the other thing is, so I'm not young. I'm almost a junior elder at this point in
You're
time.
a fierce auntie. You're a fierce
I'm a
auntie.
fierce auntie for sure. So I am actually engaging young people to talk to young people because they speak the same language, right? My language is a different language than they speak. And I knew this, from the moment I had children and they were at the other end of the dining room table having a conversation that I had to ask them what they were talking about. So I think that young people do want to be actively involved. I think young people do care about our community. I think they do care about the future. I actually think they care about me also. So I'm asking them to talk to their peers about voting. And I'm not asking them to do that, just because I have a specific interest in abortion or because I have an interest in reproductive health. I'm doing it because I have an interest in their safe, and I think they do too, in their safety and well-being. I think they have an interest in housing. I think they have an interest in being paid a fair wage. And that's what I'm asking them to talk about, and not at a specific point in time, but year round. So they don't think we're parachuting in.
Yeah, I mean, and I want to just underscore our polling said that economic issues were also just as important for older voters too. Now the only difference is that older voters are more likely to prioritize things like racism and racial justice in the state of democracy and like more voting rights. But economics still always ranks at the top, no matter the age. Krystal, did you want to just touch on that at all, or should I move on to our next question?
For the sake of time, I think we're good to move on just because we spoke a little bit about that, unless there's something specific you want me to highlight with it.
No, not at all. But I do want to stay on this topic of the younger voter. So we already know the impact, right? So we saw it in
Yeah.
2020. We saw it in 22. We know that when the youth turnout, it changes. That we saw a wave of the youth voter turnout and what it did for the country. So, I have this, Krystal, how about you answer this question? How can young voters more effectively advocate for reproductive justice within the political system? So those issues that we've been talking about, how can they be more effective based on your experiences and you, bringing these type of coalitions together?
Yeah, I think what I've seen for us is I think representation matters, and I feel like a few folks have named that today. And even in the conversation around finding community and beginning within community and such, I think representation matters, and it allows folks to, as Jan said, like me going into a middle school and speaking about the importance of like as you go into high school and thinking about your political lineage and how you fit, will fit into this, into making your vote count and things of that nature, doesn't make sense, right? Like folks are like, all right, ma'am, go sit down somewhere. But like if we're talking about like knowing folks' community and such, and like building up leaders within, in that example, within like a middle school or something like that, to go and collectively like motivate and mobilize folks within their own community, then I think that's what we've seen allows folks to feel like they can engage more, feel more comfortable in engaging. I think the other thing is like, let's be real, like stuff is hitting the fan all the time, right? Like there's all these different things that are going on, constant attacks, where we can't even open up our social media, Instagram, without feeling triggered. And it's like, all right, I need to take a pause for a few days because boom, there's something that I didn't even sign up to see, just came into on our screen. And because of our identities as BIPOC folks, or as queer folks, as trans folks, etc., we can't, like, we've been socialized into thinking it's normal, like because of all these like multiple oppressions and traumas and such, but it's not, right? So the fact that we are constantly navigating all of these constant attacks and such is already a huge lift. And then to then ask folks, hey, we're dealing with a world that's on fire, but go vote, and not really like addressing, like some of these things and how these are directly related to how we show up at the polls and like what we're voting on and such. we'll be remiss, right? So like, I think that sometimes when we're having conversations in community and specifically around young voters, if we're not intentionally connecting those dots and working to like see how the decisions we're making at the polls will directly influence the other things in our lives, like both locally and also even globally and such, then like, you know, for instance, like we've been calling for a ceasefire, like, you know, there's a genocide going on, like all of these different things. And if we're not seeing how like we're calling for political leaders and legislators to like put humanity first and such, then like how do you expect folks to vote on like the at a stop sign at the end of my street? You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, we
Yeah.
can't like we gotta be real here. So I think that this what I'm seeing in this like new wave of voters and younger folks is that like they like unlike any other generation, like shit is just in their face all the time, right? So you
Mhm.
can't skate around it. You can't like media is here, it's accessible. Whereas before you pick up a newspaper or you might see it on Facebook or whatever, you know, it was MySpace and all this other kind of stuff. Like it is everywhere now. So you
Yeah.
cannot move around it. So if you don't like in our work, if we don't address it directly and truly address it at its core and identify where people can find themselves in those spaces and what they can do to actively move and mobilize, then there's no point of continuing trying to like do all the other pieces to push people to the polls or move people to the polls rather.
Thanks, Krystal. Now, and I want to stay on the young vote and talk a little bit more to Kaylan. So, Kaylan, you were, before you started working at In Our Own Voice, you were a Next Generation Leadership Institute Fellow, which is a program that focuses squarely on engaging leaders at HBCUs. Tell me what it was like organizing for reproductive justice when you were a student at Dillard.
Well, In Our Own Voice, like you said, In Our Own Voice introduced me to reproductive justice, the lens, the framework. And I found out that reproductive justice is in every aspect of my life, multi-layered life. And so while doing this work, no one on my campus had actually heard about reproductive justice, didn't know what the term was. And no one wanted to talk about one of the big pressing issues in Louisiana, which was comprehensive sex education and also abortion. It was very taboo. And so through the Next Generation Leadership Institute, I was able to gain the confidence to have these conversations, these healthy and much needed conversations within my community, on campus and off campus, because I was educated. I was trained to have these conversations. And I think that's just one thing that was super amazing about the fellowship. Just being able to educate my community, educate myself, but then also take it a step further and educate outside the gates of Dillard University. And so I was the first fellow on Dillard's campus. And now every year we've had fellows. And so I'm very proud of what, you know, I was able to do within our own voice on Dillard's campus. And now we have folks in different students at Xavier. And we are actually trying to branch out to other campuses, not only in Louisiana, but across the United States. And so with that being said, I do want to note that the application for our next cohort is open now until May 31st, which is the deadline. And if you have any questions, Giovante Bishop, you should definitely reach out to her. Go on our website. You can learn more about the Next Generation Leadership Institute, and it's actually right there. I've always wanted to do that. It's linked below. And feel free to ask any questions, just reach out. But it's an amazing opportunity to learn more about the movement and how you can create a safe space and environment to talk about all of these issues that are directly affecting us every single day.
Thanks. I couldn't have said it any better. And oh my gosh, where has the time gone? It's 8 o'clock already. So I just want to, we unfortunately do not have time to engage in a Q&A. So I'd ask the panelists to come back on screen, give you a chance to say some quick goodbyes. But I want to thank you all. This was an incredible discussion. Your engagement and your dedication to reproductive justice is inspiring. It's fueling our work. We're seeing the fruits of your labor. And just to again remind you all, we've launched our 2024 I'm a Reproductive Justice Initiative. We encourage you to download our social media toolkit. If you want to know what you can do today, you can post, share with your networks. That goes a long way in helping us to spread the word. Also, as I said, visit iamanrjvoter.org, where you can access our other information, check your voter registration status, as well as find out what all the issues that we are engaged in. And then follow us across all our socials at Women's RJ. It's Black and on social media. Stay up to date on our journey. We're going to be in the trenches all year long. Reproductive justice is on the ballot, not just this year and beyond. And together, if we work together, we can amplify our voices and we can hold those elected officials accountable. I just want to ask my panelists, do you want to say a quick goodbye? Tell them a little bit about how they can find out more about your organizations.
Sure. Again, thank you for having me and allowing me to represent Spark Reproductive Justice Now. You can find us at Spark RJ, at Spark RJ Now on Instagram, or just our website, which is listed on the bottom of the screen, sparkrj.org. And again, we're in Atlanta, Georgia in the West End. So if you are local to the area, please drop on in.
Dan.
So thank you for having me on the program. I am a voter. You can find Black Women for Wellness at bwwla.org. Our social media is BW4WLA. That's on Instagram and Facebook. We're also on X and LinkedIn. We will be not only in the trenches, we'll be in the beauty salons, the barbershops, we'll be in these streets, and you can find us in Leimert Park in Los Angeles, as well as in Stockton, which is kind of sort of Northern California area. But look for us and we will look for you, and thank you for having me.
Well, thanks again. You know, we got a tagline at In Our Own Voice where we say, my body, my voice, my vote. But I'm going to say to you, it's your body, it's your voice, and your vote. So make sure they own it and make sure they earn it. Thanks again for joining us.
Reproductive justice voter, because I believe women have a right to make decisions for their own body and their own lifestyle.